Not everybody's able to feel a burr or see a burr. Depends on, if you got real deep fingernail grooves or if they're polished off from work. So if you can't see it or feel it, a simple piece of paper, this is just cut from a piece of Post-it note, slide it down the ramp of the blade opposite of the side you were sharpening, and if it stops, if it runs into a brick wall, see how this is catching on the burr? That means there's a burr. Now, if I flip it over, this is now the side that I was actually sharpening on. It slides off. So when you sharpen, the burr is always on the side opposite of the stone that you're sharpening on. And the paper will run into that wall, that burr. This happens to be a burr created by 240 grit. Each burr will get smaller and finer, so the paper trick lets you know when you've reached the new metal edge with one grit before you flip it over and try to establish that burr on the other side. Once you've got a burr with on both sides with one grit, that's when it's time to switch to the next grit. Each grit that you go that's finer, the burr will get finer and smaller. So when doing this, when you get to say 2000 grit, this burr is going to be very fine. It'll be very hard for you to feel or see with your eyes. So the paper trick is a great one to use. Alright, so here we have a 800 grit burr. As the burr gets smaller, it's harder to see and feel. A lot of guys would stop at 800 grit, call it good enough. It's hard to feel a burr, but again, we'll take our piece of paper, we'll do it on the side we were sharpening first, right? It slides right off. It doesn't run into any brick wall, any burr, right? So now we're going to do it on the side with the burr, and you can see the paper actually bends. It's running into that very fine burr. Now that's at 800 grit. It's hard to feel. You can try to feel it with a fingerprint. I'm able to. No burr on this side. I can clearly feel it on this side. But again, if you don't have the ability to feel it, the piece of paper is an excellent test. Here we'll look at a burr produced with 2500 grit diamond on the side that we were sharpening on. Now this burr, there was no burr on this side. This is the side I sharpened on. This burr is going to be really hard to feel even with a fingerprint. But with a piece of paper, again, it will hook on the burr. That's 2500 grit. That is a edge that a lot of people would stop honing at. That's a pretty fine edge. But yet there's still a burr established. You need to get a burr on each side, break that burr off with something like buffing compound on paper stock or cereal box cardboard, and when that burr is gone, you will have an amazingly sharp edge. Alright, so here we have a blade, same blade I've been showing you, sharpened with a 4000 grit diamond plate. It's producing pretty much a mirror finish on the blade. Alright, now that I've spun it around so many times, I have no idea which side has the burr on, but the paper is going to tell me. Alright, so this is the side that I was sharpening on, obviously. Even at a mirror finish, 4000 grit, there is a burr. If you get a burr at every grit you sharpen and get it on both sides, so now that I've got a burr on this side, I need to flip it over, sharpen this side, push the burr to the other side. Even at 4000 grit, now you will be hard pressed to feel that with a fingerprint or a fingernail. That's why the paper test is a great idea. When you get to this fine of a grit and are producing a burr, you will end up with a really sharp head. The last step for me now, after 4,000 grit, is breaking that burr off with buffing compound on cardstock or buffing compound on the back of a cereal box. Once I've gotten rid of the burr on both sides and have buffed it to a mirror finish, that is a razor blade. Now that all the burrs have been established, starting with a blank blade, unsharpened, right off the water jet cutter, 0 sharpened, flat edged, through all the grits, starting with 240 and establishing a burr. The final step is to get rid of the last burr with buffing compound. That's what this is, on a piece of paper. So in that case, I like to use a backward stroke only, so I don't cut into the paper or scrape off the buffing compound. Now here you won't be able to feel the burr even with the piece of paper, so I try to do just an even number of stroke counts on both sides. And when I get done here, I will show you what the buffing compound looks like on the paper, how it goes from white to black, because we are actually eroding away some of the metal using the buffing compound. The buffing compound is a wax crayon with a super fine powdered abrasive suspended in the wax. When you draw on the paper, cardstock, leather strop, what have you, with the buffing compound, you're really only just depositing the wax, which is the vehicle to carry the buffing compound. Now I'll show you how it's turning black. That's the metal coming off. Now we will wipe off the blade here and have a look at the finish. It'll be hard to see because at this point it's a mirror. I don't know if I can get close enough. Maybe if I tip it here on the score sheet. It's difficult to photograph a mirror. So that's going from a blank water jet blade, flat, no edge, all the way through the grits, 240 to 4,000, then buffing compound. And this just happens to be a blade that I'm developing from start to finish for a broadhead that I want to design for my own needs. It's a project that I happen to be working on. This just happens to be one of the blades. But the burr is the key. If you get a burr at every single grit, break that burr off at each grit, progress to the next grit. When you are done, you have a blade that will bite into your nail. A sharp blade will bite into your nail, and that's one of the key tests that you can do for sharpness. Yeah, you can shave and do all these other things, but the thumbnail test is an excellent test. Another test for sharpness is splitting a hair. Now this just happens to be a very gray hair out of my beard, since I've been around the sun a couple trips. Hard to photograph here, but we'll give it a try. I was trying to split the hair, not necessarily cut it. And we're starting to split it. It's difficult to do on film. Now it just keeps cutting the hair rather than splitting it. No edits here, just live takes. Oh, and we keep cutting the hair. There was a split. Another hair you can try to use is A paintbrush. There, I'm splitting them off. Splitting them in half. So again, the point being is if you can get a burr at every grit that you sharpen with, if you can finish with buffing compound, the edge that you will get will rival any razor blade